Emergency lights bathed the Galactic Council chamber in deep red as delegates from 40 different species gathered for what men believed would be a death sentence. Commander Lee Grant stood at the back of the massive circular room, watching the chaos unfold with the practiced calm that had earned her the position of human diplomatic liaison. Beside her, checked his datapad for the 100th time, his engineer's mind already racing through possibilities that others had declared impossible. Speaker, an elderly named, raised his webbed hands to silence the crowd. His amphibian skin glistened under the warning lights as he spoke in the universal trade language that all species had adopted. The news was exactly as terrible as the rumors had suggested. A massive asteroid field was on direct collision course with Vela Prime, the 12 billion. Standard deflection technology had failed completely. Asteroids contained a rare mineral called that absorbed energy weapons like a sponge drinking water. Every laser, every plasma can, every particle beam the galaxy possessed would do nothing but make the rocks slightly warmer. Stern of the Dominion rose to speak. He was tall and elegant, his crystalline body carrying the red emergency lights and scattering them across the chamber like drops of blood. They were the old species in the council, and they had seen civilization rise and fall across 10,000 years, and spoke with the weight of all that history behind him. He declared the situation hopeless. His people had run every simulation, consulted every expert, and examined every possibility. Be destroyed in 6 days. The only rational response was to begin evacuation protocols immediately. Perhaps they had saved 3% of the population if they started now. They collapsed into her seat, her gray skin turning pale as death itself. 3%. 360 million survivors out of 12 billion souls. The mathematics of extinction delivered in calm, measured tone. So watch the reactions ripple through the chamber. Some delegates nodded in sad agreement with this assessment. Others wept openly. A few began composing messages to their own, grateful that this tragedy belonged to someone else. But Lisa saw something else in the room. She saw surrender. She saw intelligent beings with technology far beyond Earth simply giving up because the numbers looked bad. Forward before could stop her. Her boots echoed on the polished floor as she walked toward the sentinel speaking platform, blinked his large eyes in surprise. Humans had only been members of the Galactic Council for 40 years. They were still considered newcomers, primitives who had barely mastered faster than let travel. Most species tolerate humanity the way adults tolerate clever children who have wandered into an important meeting. So reached the platform and requested permission to address the council, granted it with a gesture that suggested he expected nothing useful, and his crystalline face shifted into what humans had learned to recognize as contempt. He did not bother to hide it. So spoke simply and directly. Humanity requested permission to attempt a solution to the Vela Prime crisis. She did not promise success. She did not claim to have technology that had somehow missed. She simply stated that humans would like to try. It started small and grew, not from all delegates but from enough to fill the chamber with the sound of dismissal, and did not laugh. He was too dignified for that. Instead, he explained patiently, as if being a child, that human technology was centuries behind capabilities. If they could not solve the problem, humans certainly could not. He suggested that the human delegate focus on more realistic contributions, perhaps helping with refugee logistics for the survivor. So waited for the laughter to fade. Then she spoke 3 words that would be remembered across the galaxy for generations. We'll handle it. Chamber fell silent. Not the respectful silence of consideration, but the awkward silence of embarrassment. Several delegates exchanged glances that clearly communicated their pity for the naive humans who did not understand their own limitations. Asked Lisa to clarify her statement. Did humanity have some secret technology they had been hiding from the council? Some weapon or device that could accomplish what science declared impossible? Shook her head. Humanity had no secret weapons. They had no hidden technology. What they had was a different way of looking at problems. She explained that where humans came from, impossible was just a word people used before someone figured out how to do something. Every great achievement in human history had been declared impossible by experts right up until the moment it happened. Ford joined her. He had spent the last several minutes running calculations on his datapad, and his face wore the expression that Lisa had learned to recognize. It was the look out when he saw a puzzle that others had given up on. He addressed the council with technical questions about the asteroid field. He wanted to know the exact composition of the mineral. He asked about the gravitational relationship between the asteroids. Inquired about the original formation of the field. Answered with barely concealed impatience. The field was debris from an ancient planetary collision that made the asteroids impossible to destroy with energy weapons. The gravitational relationships were chaotic and unpredictable. Every question asked seemed designed to confirm the hopelessness of the situation. Smiled. He thanked the ambassador for the information and turned to Lisa with a small nod. They voted to grant humanity permission to attempt their solution. The vote was not close because most delegates believed humans deserved the chance to fail. It would be a teaching moment for the young species, a lesson in the limits of optimism when faced with cold physical reality. Sen left the chamber together. Behind them, the delegates returned to planning evacuation routes and refugee camps. The delegates sat alone, staring at nothing, already mourning a world that still had 6 days left to exist. Quarter outside, pulled up his datapad and began drafting a message to Earth. Lisa asked him if he really thought they could do this. Admitted he had no idea, but he had noticed something in the data that they had apparently dismissed as irrelevant. The asteroids were not just random debris. They still maintained gravitational connections to each other, like a family that refused to separate even after their home was destroyed. So I asked what that meant for their chances. Said it meant they did not need to destroy 200,000 asteroids. They just needed to move a few key pieces, and the rest would follow. Sanadin composed her own message to Earth. She kept it simple. She wrote that they needed the crazy ones, the people who solved problems by ignoring the reason why solutions were impossible. She sent the message in turn to 6 days to save 12 billion lives. Time to get to work. From Commander Lee Grant reached Earth at 3 in the morning Pacific time. By sunrise, Dr. Nora Bishop was already packing her bags. She had spent the last 2 years teaching basic physics at a small university after the prestigious academy had dismissed her for what they called primitive thinking. Her crime had been suggesting that sometimes small-hearted interventions work better than massive displays of technological power. They had found this philosophy embarrassing. Humanity needed exactly that kind of thinking. Tony Vay received his summons while inspecting explosive charges at an asteroid mining facility near Mars. The military had loaned him to the mining corporations because nobody understood controlled demolition better than Tony. He had spent 15 years blowing things up in exactly the right way, turning dangerous asteroids into profitable chunks of ore. When he read the mission briefing, he whistled low and long. This was going to be the biggest job of his career. Was running a cargo route through the debris field when the call came through. Most pilots refused to enter because the density of rocks and wreckage made navigation nearly suicidal. Ma flew it 3 times a week because the hazard pay was excellent and because she found the challenge relaxing. Her ship, the the Dawn Chaser, had more pat repairs than original hull plating, but it responded to her commands like an extension of her own body. Youngest member of the team. At 24, he had already been fired from 3 different analytics firms for being too creative with data. His employers wanted him to find patterns that confirmed what they already believed, kept finding patterns that told inconvenient truths. When the recruitment officer explained the mission, asked for access to the sensor data, he found what he was looking for within an hour. Assembled aboard the Dawn Chaser as it departed Earth orbit. They had never worked together before, but they fell into a rhythm almost immediately. Lisa ran the mission coordination while handled engineering requirements, towing his explosives with the loving care of an artist examining paintbrushes. North studied gravitational models on 3 different screens. My guided the ship through jump points with casual precision that made even routine maneuvers look like dancing. His findings on the second day of trial. He had discovered something that had apparently considered unimportant. The asteroid field was not random chaos. It was the corpse of an ancient planet, and corpses retained structure even in death. The asteroids were still gravitationally bound to each other in subtle ways. They moved together through space like a flock of birds, each one responding to the movements of its neighbor. Caden made his eyes light up. He asked if he had identified which asteroids were the leaders of the flock, smiled and displayed a map showing 47 sick rocks scattered throughout the field. These were the keystone asteroids, the ancient core fragments of the destroyed planet. Every other asteroid in the field responded to their gravitational pull. Move the keystones, and the entire field would follow. Leaned forward with sudden interest. He asked how much they needed to move these keystones, ran the calculations, and produced a number that made everyone in the room hold their breath. Each keystone needed to shift its trajectory by only 2 degrees. A tiny adjustment, spread across 47 rocks, would redirect 200,000 asteroids away from Velar Prime. Pointed out the obvious problem. Even a 2-degree shift required enormous force when applied to asteroids that massed millions of tons each. Standard explosives would barely scratch them. Energy weapons were useless against them. Grinned and opened one of his equipment cases. He explained that he had brought something special, non-standard charges designed for deep core mining operation. They did not try to destroy rock. Instead, they created directional force pulses that could shove material in specific direction, plant them in the right spots, detonate them in the right sequence, and even the biggest asteroid would move. Came together over the next several hours. Tony would calculate the exact placement for each shard. Ma would fly the team into the field to plant them on unstable asteroids where drones could not operate safely, would monitor the gravitational relationships in real time, adjusting the sequence if anything shifted unexpectedly. Nora would handle the physics of the chain reaction, ensuring each detonation amplified the effects of the ones before it, would coordinate the technical system. So we'd keep the Galactic Council informed, and hopefully keep them from interfering. We're still 3 days from the Velar system when the alien observer made their presence known. 2 scientists had been assigned to the mission, officially as consultants but obviously as witnesses to human failure. Their names were N, and they watched the human planning session with expressions of polite disbelief. Maya how she planned to navigate a debris field with 200,000 moving objects. Maya explained that she did not plan anything. She would react to what the field showed her, trust her instincts, and fly the gaps between destruction. Informed her that pilots used predictive algorithms with a 94% accuracy rate. Maya replied that she preferred the 100% accuracy rate of not 9. The team's work style was evident confusion. Humans argued constantly. They interrupted each other, made jokes during serious discussions, and seemed to change the plan every few hours. Reported to Ambassador that the humans appeared to be engaged in some form of denial ritual, unable to accept the futility of their mission, and therefore pretending that enthusiasm could substitute for capability. Report reached the Galactic Council and spread quickly. Most delegates read it as confirmation of what they already expected. The humans would fail, but they would provide useful data about the limits of optimism. Perhaps their sacrifice would teach future generations to listen when wiser species declared something impossible. So read the report when intercepted through channels that humans were not supposed to have access to. She laughed and passed it around the team. Tony suggested framing it after they saved 12 billion lives. Ma wanted to send a copy to whatever pilot had a 94% survival rate. Returned to his screens. He had found something else in the data, something he was not ready to share yet. The gravitational patterns were not quite what they should be. There was a mass somewhere in the field that the sensors could not see. Something big, something hidden by the very that made the asteroids indestructible. Decided to wait until they arrived at Velar. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe the anomaly was just sensor noise, but had learned to trust patterns even when they pointed toward things he did not want to find. Dawn Chaser dropped out of fat-than-light travel at the edge of the Velar system. The asteroid field was visible on long-range sensors, a cloud of death drifting toward a blue-green world that looked heartbreakingly like Earth. 2 hours remained until impact. The clock started now. HFY Prime received the human delegation in her private office rather than the formal reception hall. The formal hall was being used as a refugee coordination center, processing the lottery that would determine which 3% of her people might survive among the stars. She was a tall woman by standard, her gray skin showing the straight lines that came from too many sleepless nights. Her large dark eyes carried the weight of 12 billion souls. Thanked the humans for coming. Her voice was steady but empty, the voice of someone who had already accepted death and was simply going through the motions of hope for the sake of others. She explained that her people had been watching the news feeds from the Galactic Council. They knew what they had said. They knew the odds, but they appreciated that someone was willing to try. So introduced her team and explained the plan in simple terms. They were not going to destroy the asteroids. They were going to redirect them by moving the key pieces that held the field together. 47 precise detonations would shift the entire mass onto a new trajectory that would miss Velar Prime completely. Governor H listened without interruption. When Lisa finished, the governor asked a single question. She wanted to know if the humans actually believed it would work, or if they were simply providing her people with false hope to make the end easier. Before Lisa could speak, he admitted that he did not know if it would work. Nobody had ever attempted anything like that before, but he explained that humans had a long history of doing things that nobody had ever done before. Their entire journey to the stars had been a series of impossible achievements, each one building on the last. He could not promise success, but he could promise that they would give everything they had. Governor State's face for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled. She told the humans that their honesty was refreshing. They had offered certainty of failure. The humans offered uncertainty of success. Somehow, uncertainty felt more alive. Assigned captain to accompany the mission as an observer and liaison, was a career military officer, compact and efficient, with the kind of face that revealed nothing. He had been preparing to die defending evacuation ships from panic and chaos. Watching humans attempt the impossible seemed like a better use of his final days. Dawn Chaser entered the asteroid field 12 hours later. The transition from empty space to crowded danger happened faster than anyone expected. One moment they were cruising through void. The next moment, rocks surrounded them in every direction, tumbling and spinning in patterns that prediction. Took manual control of the ship and began to fly. The observers watched in silence as she wove between asteroids that should have crushed them, anticipating movements before they happened, trusting paces that appeared too small, till the moment she was already through them. Her hands moved across the controls with the casual grace of someone playing a familiar instrument. Guided her toward the first keystone asteroid. It was a massive chunk of ancient planetary core, dense with metals that had formed under pressures that no longer existed in the universe. The surface was cratered, and a face that had witnessed the death of its world and carried the memory in stone. Went out first. 12 small robots carrying charges to predetermined points on the asteroid's surface. Tony watched their progress on his screen, adjusting position by centimeters, demanding precision that the drone struggled to provide. 9 charges placed successfully. The 10th drone failed, its navigation system confused by the sense scrambling property. He did not hesitate. He announced that he was going out there personally. Protested that the asteroid was too unstable for human EVA operations. Tone pointed out that the asteroid did not care about their opinions and started suiting up. Held the Dawn Chaser in position while Tony floated across open space to the keystone. The asteroid's surface was not solid in any meaningful sense. It shifted and cracked beneath his magnetic boots, chunks of rock breaking away and drifting into the void. He found the drone's intended placement point and set the charge by hand, his fingers working through thick gloves with practiced affinity. Back aboard the Dawn Chaser in 20 minutes. 3 hours later, all 47 keystones had been armed. Some required drone placement, others required human hands, and 2 required Maya to perform maneuvers that the observers declared physically impossible, even as they watched them happen. Under the field's gravitational dance throughout the process. Each charge placement changed the equation slightly, and he adjusted the detonation sequence to compensate. The pattern was holding. The keystones were responding to each other exactly as the model predicted. In 18 hours, they would trigger the sequence and watch 200,000 asteroids shift onto a new course. Saw the anomaly again. The hidden mass he had detected during the journey was still there, still invisible to direct sensors, still throwing off the gravitational calculations by small amounts that were getting larger. He ran the numbers 3 times before he was certain. Called the team together and displayed his findings. Somewhere deep in the asteroid field, hidden by the sensor-absorbing properties, there was another asteroid, a big one, bigger than any of the keystones, bigger than anything else in the field by a factor of 10. I asked how they could have missed something that large, explained that there was not just absorbing energy weapon, it was absorbing sensor sweeps too. The mega asteroid was essentially invisible to their instruments. The only evidence of its existence was the subtle pull it exerted on everything around it. That's the question everyone was thinking. Would their plan still work with this unknown variable? Silent was answer enough. She took a deep breath and made the call that defined leadership. She ordered Maya to take them deeper into the field. They needed to find this hidden monster and figure out how it changed their calculations. They had 17 hours until the detonation sequence. That was enough time to solve one more impossible problem. Smiled and turned the Dawn Chase toward the heart of the asteroid field. Behind her, Captain watched the humans adapt to disaster with the same casual efficiency they had shown adapting to everything else. He began to understand why they had underestimated them. Where they flew, the denser the field became. Asteroids pressed close on all sides, some close enough to scrape the hull. Maya navigated by instinct and prayer, trusting the ship to tell her when danger was truly imminent. The sensors grew more confused with each kilometer, creating blind spots and fault readings that made navigation nearly impossible. Found the mega asteroid 4 hours later. It hung in the dark like a hidden moon, massive and ancient and utterly invisible to anything except the naked eye. Calculations had been correct. The thing was enormous, nearly twice the size of all 47 keystones combined. It was on a completely different trajectory. It was not part of the original planetary debris. It was a captured object, dragged into the field by gravitational chant millions of years ago. The keystones would not pull it along when they moved. It would continue on its current course, straight toward Vela Prime. If they redirected every other asteroid in the field, this single hidden giant would still end the world. Looked at the mega asteroid on the inside what everyone was thinking. They were out of charges. They had nothing left to throw at the problem. The plan had just died. Stared at the massive rock and refused to accept defeat. There had to be something they could do. There was always something. She turned to her team and asked the only question that mattered. What do we have? Dawn Chaser drifted in the shadow of the mega asteroid while the team gathered in the con room. The clock showed 14 hours until the scheduled detonation sequence. 14 hours to solve a problem that had no solution with the resources they had available. Their inventory across the table. They had food and water for another 2 weeks, metal supplies, communication equipment, navigation systems. 47 charges already planted on keystones throughout the field. 1 ship with engine designed for speed rather than power. 1 ship? The idea came to Tony first. He was staring at the engine specifications when the connection formed in his mind. The Dawn Chase drive core was not just a propulsion system. It was a contained energy reaction powerful enough to push a ship faster than light. If that energy were released all at once, in a direct explosion rather than a controlled burn, it would produce a force comparable to a small nuclear detonation. He shared the thought carefully, knowing what it meant. The math was simple. If they positioned the Dawn Chaser against the mega asteroid's surface and overload the drive core, the directional blast would shove the asteroid onto a new trajectory. The ship would be destroyed. Anyone aboard would die. It was silent for a long moment. Then Nora asked about the physics. Could they actually direct the explosion precisely enough? Tony and worked the calculations together, their voices overlapping as they built the solution piece by piece. Yes, it could work. The drive core's magnetic containment could be modified to focus the blast in a single direction. The mega asteroid would shift just enough to miss Vela Prime. The complication that made everything harder. The detonation sequence for the keystones was already locked in. They could not change it remotely. Someone needed to stay aboard the Dawn Chase to trigger both the keystone sequence and the drive core overload at precisely the right moments. The time window was less than 30 seconds. Computer could not handle the real-time adjustments. It had to be a human-making decision based on what they saw. So I asked how they would evacuate the person who stayed behind. Explained that the ship had 2 emergency pods designed for exactly this kind of disaster. They could trigger the overload, set a timer, and escape in the pods before the explosion. 4 minutes should be enough time. B. The uncertainty hung in the air like poison. Spoke next. She pointed out that someone needed to fly the Dawn Chaser in exact position against the mega asteroid. The surface was unstable, the gravitational fields were chaotic, and the made instruments unreliable. This was not a job for AudioBook. There was a job for someone who could feel the ship and react to the unexpected. It was volunteering to stay, not with words but with logic that could not be argued. His head, he was the mission commander. The decision to sacrifice the ship was his responsibility. He would fly it in position and trigger the overload. Maya should take the emergency pod and escape with the others. Reminded him that he was an engineer, not a pilot. He could handle the technical aspects of the overload, but he could not fly the Dawn Chaser through unstable asteroid terrain by feel alone. They needed both skills. They both had to stay. Had been listening in silence. Now he stepped forward and offered his shuttle as an evacuation vehicle for the rest of the team. His ship was small but fast, designed for short-range military operation. It could carry Lisa, Nora, Tony, and the two observers to safety while Maya completed the mission. Started to argue, cut her off with the quiet authority of someone who had made peace with death. He told her that his people needed her alive to tell the Galactic Council what happened here. They needed Nora and Tony to apply their skills to feud crises. They did not need another officer dying in a gesture of solidarity. Observers then had remained silent throughout the discussion. They exchanged glances that communicated something complex in their crystalline features, then spoke. He wanted to know why humans did this. Why did they sacrifice themselves for strangers? But were not human allies. They had no treaties, no trade agreements, no shared history. By any rational calculation, human lives were worth more to humanity than lives. Laughed, but not cruelly. He explained that humans did not make those calculations. When someone needed help and humans could provide it, they helped. It was that simple. The math of sacrifice only made sense if you believed some lives were worth more than others. Humans had learned, through centuries of painful mistakes, that nobody got to make that judgment. As if this philosophy was universal among humans, Tony admitted it was not. Humans could be cruel and selfish and short-sighted like any other species, but when the moment came, when someone had to step up, there was always a human willing to do it. That willingness was what defined them. 3 hours were consumed by preparation. Tony modified the drive core containment systems while programmed the detonation sequences. Ma ran simulation after simulation of the approach to the mega asteroid, memorizing the terrain so she could fly it blind if the sensors failed completely. Lisa recorded messages for the Galactic Council and for Earth, explaining what they were about to attempt and why. Alone at his station, refining the gravitational calculation one last time, he found something that made him pause. The timing window was even smaller than they had calculated, and Maya would have less than 3 minutes to reach their emergency pods after triggering the overload. The blast radius would be larger than expected. The margin for error had just disappeared. He shared the information with privately, nodded and asked not to tell the others. It would not change anything except to add fear to an already impossible situation. Maya was committed. They would either make it or they would not. The evacuation began 10 hours before the detonation. Captain's shuttle detached from the Dawn Chaser and began its careful retreat through the asteroid field. Lisa watched through the viewport as the ship that had carried them across the stars grew smaller and smaller against the tumbling rocks. They had the Dawn Chase toward the mega asteroid. The approach took 4 hours of intense concentration, threading between debris that seemed determined to destroy them. Played havoc with her instruments, but Maya had stopped trusting instruments hours ago. She flew by the feel of the ship, by the subtle vibrations that told her when something was wrong, by the instinct that had kept her alive through 1,000 dangerous flights. Beside her, preparing the drive core for its final function. He talked as he worked, not about the mission but about small things. He mentioned a restaurant in San Francisco that made the best breakfast burritos he had ever tasted. He described the view from his apartment window on clear mornings. He asked Maya about her life, her family, her dreams. I answered between course corrections. She had no family anymore. Her dreams had always been about flying, about finding the edge of what was possible and pushing past it. She had never expected to find that edge like this. Dawn Chaser settled against the mega asteroid's surface with a gentle shudder. Maya cut the engines and engaged the magnetic anchors that would hold them in place for the explosion. Outside the viewports, the ancient rock stretched in every direction, a landscape of craters and shadows that had drifted through space for millions of years. Lead the final connection. The drive core was ready. The detonation sequence was armed. In 2 hours, they would trigger both systems and pray that the math was correct. Looked at Maya and asked if she was ready. She smiled and said she had been ready her whole life. They settled in to wait. The final hour began with silence, and Maya sat in the cockpit of the Dawn Chaser, watching the countdown timer mark the seconds until everything changed. Outside, the mega asteroid's surface was still and cold, a frozen monument to cosmic violence that would soon receive one final blow. The voice came through the communication system. Captain's shuttle had reached safe distance. The rest of the team was watching through long-range sensors, helpless to do anything but bear witness. She told Maya that the Galactic Council had opened an emergency channel. 40 species were watching the day of feeds in real time. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy was holding its breath for him. The message and returned to his preparation. The drive core was humming with contained power and magnetic fields holding back an explosion that wanted desperately to happen. His modifications had worked exactly as planned. The blast would be directional, focused, precise. The mega asteroid would move. Monitored the gravitational readings from the keystone asteroids. The field was stable, waiting for the signal that would set everything in motion. In 12 minutes, 47 explosions would rip through 200,000 rocks, and the dance of death would become a dance of salvation. Voice joined the channel. He had been running final calculations and found something unexpected. The mega asteroid's trajectory had shifted slightly during their approach. The gravitational interaction with nearby rocks had changed the angle by a fraction of a degree. Maya would need to adjust the ship position to compensate. It was already moving before finished speaking. She released the magnetic anchors and fired maneuvering thrusters, lifting the Dawn Chaser off the asteroid's surface. The new position was only 30 meters away, but reaching it required threading between rock formations that seemed determined to block her path. On the spot and settled back down with seconds to spare. Checked the alignment and confirmed they were ready. The drive core would fire in exactly the right direction. The mega asteroid would miss Velar Prime by a margin that would seem generous to anyone who did not understand how close they had come. Minutes remained on the countdown. Initiated the drive core overload sequence. The magnetic containment fields began their controlled collapse, building pressure that would soon become impossible to restrain. The ship vibrated with energy that had nowhere to go except out. Asked if he had any regrets, he thought about the question seriously before answering. He regretted not seeing his family one more time. He regretted not finishing the book he had been reading. He regretted that he would never taste those breakfast burritos again. But he did not regret being here. He did not regret choosing to try when everyone else had given up. Said she had only one regret. She had never learned to cook. She had always meant to, but flying had consumed her life so completely that she never found the time. If she survived this, she was going to take cooking lessons. I've been promised to hold her to that. The drive core was screaming now, audibly in through the hull, armed the emergency pod systems and ran one final check. Both pods were functional. Both launch tubes were clear. They would have less than 3 minutes to reach them after triggering the overload. Men. Triggered the keystone detonation sequence. Across the asteroid field, 47 exploded and bloomed in perfect synchronized beauty. The keystone shuddered and shifted, their new trajectories pulling at the small rocks around them like shepherds calling scattered flocks. That the field was moving. The gravitational cascade was propagating exactly as predicted. 200,000 asteroids were beginning the slow pivot that would carry them away from Vela Prime. The first part of the mission was complete. Seconds. Initiated the final drive core overload. The countdown was automatic now, beyond human control. They had done everything they could. The rest was physics. Shouted for Maya to run. They sprinted through the corridor toward the emergency pod bay, the ship shaking around them as the drive core reached critical pressure. Maya reached her pod first and dove inside. She slammed the launch control and felt the acceleration crush her into the seat as the pod shot away from the Dawn Chaser. 3 steps behind her, he threw himself toward his pod as the ship began to tear itself apart. The launch tube was right there, close enough to touch, close enough to save him. Explosion came too soon. The drive core containment failed half a second early, releasing energy that vaporized the Dawn Chaser in an instant of blinding light. The directional blast slammed into the mega-asteroid with force that moved mountains. The pod tumbled through the shockwave, thrown by forces that should have destroyed it. She lost consciousness as the pod's emergency systems fought to keep her alive. The last thing he saw through the viewport was the mega-asteroid shifting, moving, changing course exactly as they had planned. 16 hours later in the metal bay of Captain's shuttle, Lisa was there, her face drawn with exhaustion and grief. Maya asked about before she asked about anything else. Lisa's expression told her the answer before the words came. Pod had launched. The telemetry confirmed it, but the explosion had caught him before he cleared the blast radius. His pod was debris now, scattered across 1,000,000 kilometers of space. I closed her eyes and let the tears come. Vela Prime, 12 billion people watched the sky change. The asteroid field that had been their death sentence was drifting away, pulled by invisible hands onto a new path that would carry it harmlessly into deep space. The mega-asteroid followed behind, shoved by the sacrifice of 2 humans who had refused to let strangers die. Her H addressed her people with tears streaming down her face. She spoke of hope and courage and the kinds of beings they had never met. She spoke of who had given his life for a world he would never see. She declared that Vela Prime would remember humanity forever. Galactic Council convened 3 days later. Ambassador and requested permission to speak first. The chamber expected criticism, expected to find some way to diminish what had happened. They were wrong. Before 40 species and apologized. He admitted that they had been prepared to accept 12 billion deaths as an acceptable loss. They had declared the situation impossible because solving it would have required risk, and they had forgotten how to risk anything for anyone. Of watching the day of feeds as humans flew into danger without hesitation. He spoke of Maya threading through asteroid fields that pilots refused to enter. He spoke of staying behind to ensure the timing was perfect, choosing certain death over uncertain survival. He spoke of a species that had been in space for only 40 years teaching the galaxy what courage looked like. Humans say they will handle something, and declared the galaxy should listen. So voted unanimously to grant humanity a permanent seat on the Security Committee. The decision was not charity or gratitude. It was recognition that humans brought something the galaxy needed, a willingness to attempt the impossible that other species had lost somewhere in their long histories. Ended the ceremony from a wheelchair, still recovering from injuries that would take months to heal fully. She accepted the commendation on behalf of her team and spoke briefly about. She did not make him a saint. She described him as he was a brilliant engineer who talked too much about breakfast food and made terrible jokes when he was nervous. She said he had been afraid at the end. Everyone was afraid, but he had done the right thing anyway. That was what made him human. So received a message from Earth as the ceremony concluded. Another crisis had emerged, another species asking for help that nobody else would provide. A solar system facing catastrophe that the Galactic Council had already declared unsolvable. He showed the message to Maya. Maya read it and smiled despite everything. She composed her response with the same 3 words she had used before, the words that had started everything, the words that defined what humanity offered the galaxy. We'll handle it. We're in the vats of space. 12 billion looked up at stars that they had almost never seen again. They did not know the names of everyone who had saved them. They did not understand the technology or the physics or the disparate improvisation that had turned death into survival. They knew one thing with absolute certainty. When humans made a promise, humans kept it.